welcome to the Dream Season podcast, an oral history of the 1989-90 UConn men's basketball season, also known as the Dream Season. This is episode 3, the NIT. The 1987-88 UConn season began with an increased sense of optimism, despite finishing 9-19 the previous year. One simple reason for the high hopes was that there were now 12 scholarship players at the first practice of the season, compared to only 8 the year before. The Huskies would miss forward Jerry Besselink, the lone senior from that 9-19 season. 2 freshmen were being counted on to contribute right away. Lyman DePriest, a 6'6 forward from Detroit, Michigan, and 6'7 swingman Murray Williams from Torrington, Connecticut. Williams choosing UConn was considered a major victory for Jim Calhoun and his plan to keep Connecticut high school stars from choosing other schools. Another newcomer who the UConn coaching staff was excited about was Willie McLeod, a 6'4.5 forward from Allegheny Community College in Cumberland, Maryland. McLeod is the first junior college transfer in the Jim Calhoun era. He is also the younger brother of Seton Hall legend Andre McLeod, who was the 4th leading scorer in Big East history when he graduated after the 1986 season. There were 2 other newcomers on campus. Unfortunately, both were casualties of Proposition 48 and would not be able to compete during their freshman year. Mark Sir, a 7-footer from Cologne, West Germany, by way of Lake Tahoe, is the first 7-footer to play at UConn. John Gwynn, a 6-foot shooting guard from Hyattsville, Maryland, is a product of the famed DeMatha High School and their legendary head coach, Morgan Wooten. Despite the recruiting successes over the previous months, including the most impactful one yet, maybe ever, but we'll get to that one in the next episode, UConn still wasn't at the level that Calhoun had hoped to achieve. The top recruiting priority for Calhoun and his staff was Perry Carter, a 6'8" forward from Washington, D.C., who played his senior year of high school at Maine Central Institute. Calhoun wrote Carter a letter every week during the season, and at least one member of the coaching staff attended 44 of the 45 games Carter had played since the summer of his senior year. Even UConn president John Castine pitched in, making a call to Carter to try to convince him to come to Storrs. Carter was also good friends with Phil Gamble, and for most of his recruiting process, UConn was considered the favorite to land Carter. However, Carter surprised everyone by choosing to attend Ohio State over UConn, Duke, Boston College, and Villanova. Calhoun was disappointed, saying, quote, "I didn't look at Perry as a 6'8", 220-pound forward. More than that, I looked at Perry as being symbolic of a step forward." End quote. Here's assistant coach Dave Lato on Perry's decision.
Losing that recruiting battle to Ohio State. Again, and Ohio State was a national program. Jimmy O'Brien was coaching there. And we thought, like, why would he ever go there, and not come to UConn, particularly as Phil Gamble was one of his best friends. So we thought it was a very doable situation, but it kind of spoke to where UConn was at that time. And it just was not as marketable for kids in the East, especially, to choose it and have people say to them, why the heck are you going there?
The Perry Carter decision was big news in March of 1987, so much so that according to columnist Owen Canfield of the Hartford Courant, a flurry of phone calls from disappointed UConn fans flooded the Courant's sports office as news of Carter's decision broke. Canfield ended his column on the subject with the following, quote, "If there is a ray of pale sunlight in all this fuss, it can be heard in the ringing of the telephones. If they rang steadily in this office, they surely burned out the lines in the athletic offices in Storrs. UConn basketball is big stuff, and people care enough to call and make no effort to stifle or disguise their disappointment when the news is bad. One of these days, the news is going to be good." End quote. There were a couple of other important changes to the program that took place before the first practice in October. First, Glenn Miller joined the staff as an assistant coach, replacing Bill Cardarelli, who returned to coaching high school in Connecticut. Miller played at UConn for 2 years in the early 80s before transferring to Northeastern and playing for Jim Calhoun. In addition, Ted Woodard joined the staff as a graduate assistant. More notably, on Monday, June 29, 1987, ground was finally broken on the $28.5 million UConn Sports Center. The cost was 5 times the original estimate and is expected to be hosting games in 1990, 21 years after it was first proposed to the Board of Trustees. The first official practice of the season was held on Thursday, October 15th. As was the case in Calhoun's first season, this first practice of the year was a grueling affair. Said Cliff Robinson, quote, "That was tougher than anything we went through last season," end quote. The Huskies played one exhibition game prior to the regular season, falling to the Canadian national team 86-79. They opened the regular season with 2 non-conference wins at the Fieldhouse, defeating Maryland Eastern Shore and Yale, avenging their loss to the Elis from the previous year. Next up was a showdown with an ACC team, Virginia, at the Civic Center. Cliff Robinson, who only scored 2 points against Yale, struggled again, going 2 for 11 from the floor as the Huskies fell in a non-competitive matchup, 72-59. Aside from Cliff's early season struggles, another surprise for UConn early in the season was Phil Gamble beginning the season as the team's 6th man. He had started all 44 games of his career prior to the season, but he embraced his new role, providing a scoring boost early in games. Following the loss of Virginia, UConn traveled to Villanova for their first Big East opener. For the 3rd consecutive game, Cliff Robinson failed to score in double digits. Despite Cliff's struggles, the Huskies held their own. With UConn trailing by 2, Spider Ursery hit a bank shot from the right side of the lane to tie the score at 61 with 16 seconds left. However, Mark Plansky's 12-foot jump shot with 1 second remaining gave the Wildcats a 63-61 win. This was UConn's 13th consecutive loss to Villanova. Next, UConn coasted to wins over Morgan State and Central Connecticut at the Fieldhouse. Cliff Robinson ended his scoring slump against Morgan State, scoring a career-high 31 points. After a short break for Christmas, the Huskies then faced off with the University of Hartford in the first game of the Connecticut Mutual Classic at the Civic Center. In last year's tournament, the Hawks beat the Huskies 49-48. In a chippy physical game, UConn survived blowing an 8-point lead with less than 2 minutes to play in regulation and won a double overtime thriller, 96-94. UConn was led by Cliff Robinson's 42 points and moved on to play Princeton in the championship game the following night. With UConn trailing Princeton by 11 points with 12 minutes and 30 seconds left in the game, the Huskies used a full-court press to help hold the Tigers without a field goal for 14 minutes and 9 seconds. The Huskies won the Root Canal-esque championship game 49-46, claiming their first Connecticut Mutual Classic title since 1983. Cliff Robinson was named tournament MVP after going 25 of 37 from the floor and scoring 72 points over the 2 games. After the calendar turned to 1988, the Huskies traveled to California for their first visit to the Golden State since the 1968-69 season to take on the Pepperdine Waves. After some sightseeing in the LA area, UConn took care of business with a 63-60 victory. The win was the 5th consecutive for the Huskies, the longest streak since Jim Calhoun took over as head coach. One day after returning to the East Coast, the Huskies were in East Rutherford to face Seton Hall for their second Big East matchup of the season. The Pirates won easily, 71-58, to avenge their 2 losses to UConn the previous season. The Seton Hall game began a stretch of 8 consecutive Big East games for UConn, with 4 at home and 4 on the road. Of the 4 road games, 3 were at ranked opponents, number 6 Pittsburgh, number 9 Syracuse, and number 15 Georgetown. The Huskies went 2-6 during that stretch. They lost to Seton Hall twice, with the second game being much closer than the first, falling 61-59 at the Civic Center. They lost by 3 at Pitt, by 1 at Georgetown, and by 7 in overtime at St. John's. UConn also lost to Villanova again, this time at home by 11, and also defeated Providence at home by 7. The highlight of that brutal part of the schedule was a 51-50 win at number 9 Syracuse in front of 29,898 fans. With the score knotted at 50, Tate George made a nifty pass to Cliff Robinson in the lane, where he was intentionally fouled by Sherman Douglas. Robinson missed the first free throw, but made the second, and after UConn inbounded the ball successfully, they came away with one of the biggest wins for the program in many years. UConn's record was now 9-8, with a Big East mark of 2-7. The Huskies proceeded to go 4-5 over their next 9 games. They defeated Holy Cross by 1 point, Fairfield, Boston College, and 14th-ranked Georgetown at the Civic Center. The 5 losses during that stretch, all but one were games UConn could have won. They lost to St. John's again by 15, but the rest were close. An 85-79 loss at Providence, 64-56 loss at Boston College, a 74-69 loss at the Civic Center to number 6 Pittsburgh. The most painful loss, though, was to Syracuse. In front of a sold-out Hartford Civic Center and the score tied at 71 all, UConn advanced the ball past half court and used their final timeout with 8 seconds left in the game. Senior Jeff King received the ball from the referee and struggled to find an open Husky. Nearing a 5-second violation, King threw the ball inbounds, but directly into the hands of Syracuse's Stephen Thompson, who had an unobstructed path to the hoop. Thompson's dunk with 4 seconds left gave the Orange a 73-71 victory. After the loss to St. John's to end February, The Huskies' overall record stood at 13-13. The bad news was that they were locked into the dreaded 8-9 game in the Big East tournament. The good news was that there was one more non-conference game on the slate. The matchup against tiny Brooklyn College was rescheduled from a day early in the season to the end of the season to allow for the trip to California to play Pepperdine in early January. A win over Brooklyn College would guarantee a .500 record for UConn, which would make them excellent candidates to receive an NIT bid. No team with a record under .500 has ever made the tournament, and in recent years, the NIT has chosen other Big East schools with similar records. The shorthanded Kingsmen were no match for the Huskies, who won easily, 90-51. Next up was the 8-9 game against Providence in the Big East tournament. Even if UConn lost to the Friars, their record would be 14-14 and an attractive team for the NIT to select. UConn made any worries about their record irrelevant after defeating Providence 75-62. It was the first Big East tournament win for the Huskies since the 1979-80 season, the inaugural year of the conference. After the game, Jim Calhoun said, quote, "This team has surprised me. They've been so competitive against everyone we've played. I feel a lot of pride," end quote. They moved on to play the number 1 seeded Pitt Panthers, who made quick work of the Huskies, 75-58. Now they had to sit and wait and see if the NIT would call. The NIT did call, sending UConn on the road to take on West Virginia in the opening round. West Virginia sported a 121-14 home record since the 1979-80 season, but the Huskies were not fazed. Coach Calhoun said, quote, "We're happy to be in and happy to have the opportunity to play a quality opponent. It's a good problem," end quote. The West Virginia game would be game number 30 for UConn, which sets a new mark for the program, as no team had ever played more than 29 games in a season. Here's WFSB's Phil Andrews, Jim Calhoun, and Murray Williams to recap the game.
Tonight, they took one big step toward winning the 1988 NIT title with a 62-57 overtime victory in Morgantown, West Virginia, a hard place to win a game. It was anybody's game in the first half. Darryl Crew with the bucket there to make it 45-43 West Virginia. Then late in the second half, Huskies made their move. Cliff Robinson to the bucket, tying the game at 47. Time running out regulation. Huskies down by 2, 50-48, but Tate George gets the open lane to the hoop. Count it. We go into overtime, knotted at 50. The Mountaineers would take their early overtime lead. Herbie Brooks with the brick, but freshman Chris Brooks, no relation, for the slam. However, the Huskies would take the lead for good behind the scoring of Tate George. Here to the hoop, he had 15 points on the night. The Huskies work overtime to win in first round NIT action, 62-57.
Once we were in overtime, you could feel that we were ready to go. And we got a second life, and we took advantage of it.
I mean, we were struggling the whole game, and all we did was kept our composure and kept coming at them, and finally, in the end, it came out our way.
Longtime UConn radio color analyst Wayne Norman talks about the shot Tate George hit to send the game to overtime.
Jim Calhoun will tell you that maybe a more important shot by Tate George was the NIT first-round game at West Virginia. About a 5 or 8 foot shot that banked in with about 6 seconds to go in regulation, and they won the game in overtime. That first Tate George shot is one of the most important plays in his coaching tenure and maybe in UConn basketball history.
Since the NIT didn't have seedings or a bracket to determine matchups, UConn had to wait for word from tournament officials to find out who their next opponent would be and where the game would be held. It turned out that UConn would host 22-8 Louisiana Tech on Monday, March 21st at the Civic Center. The Bulldogs were led by 6'8 junior forward Randy White, who was dubbed the Mailman 2 due to the similarities between his game and another former Bulldog, Karl Malone. White would end up being picked 8th in the 1989 NBA draft by the Dallas Mavericks. The Huskies led 34-27 at halftime, but struggled at the start of the second half, failing to score on their first 8 possessions. The Bulldogs scored 9 straight points to go up 36-34 when Calhoun called timeout. UConn then scored the next 8 points and shut down White, who went the final 14 minutes and 23 seconds of the game without scoring a point. Despite the cold start to the second half, the Huskies shot a season-high 67.5% from the floor and held on for a 65-59 win.
The Bulldogs, they fall to 22-9 on the season as they finish up under third-year coach Tommy Joe Eagles, and they are all done for the year. But they gave the Huskies fits, especially in the early portions of the second half. After trailing by 10 in the first half, they caught up, actually led for a time in the second half before succumbing by that 6-point final. And I I believe we're ready to throw it over to Terry O'Connor with the head coach Jim Calhoun, and he's also got Murray Williams out there. And
Mike, thank you very much. Congratulations, Jimmy. You got to be very, very happy.
Well, we really are. We come out, we played real well, and then we went to a funk. Come out the second half, we just couldn't find anything and had no rhythm. Called a timeout, and we seemed to start to get our rhythm back. And I think what happened, honestly, Terry, is that we were looking so much for Clifford, nobody else was moving, and that really hurt us. And then we got Murray involved, and I think good things started happening to us.
You were 0 for 5 from the field at the start of the second half. You went 11 for 12. You probably don't know this yet. You shot 66% from the field as a team, the highest in a lot of years at UConn.
Yeah, it is an awful high. Unfortunately, only won by a few, so that shows you the fact that maybe we didn't get as many shots as we'd like. But quite honestly, they're a pretty good basketball team, and to go to right now, there's only 8 left in the NIT, and we're very happy about that.
Let's bring in Murray. Murray, come on in here. A freshman, Jimmy. What are your thoughts on Murray's performance here tonight?
Well, he's just really developing every single game. He's led us in rebounding, I think, 6 of the last 9 games. He's been averaging double figures, I think, in the last 7 games. So as a freshman, he's really coming on. He's got a great future here for us.
Murray, what does this win tonight for you? It means there aren't too many Big East teams left playing right now. Boston College and you here. What did this one mean for you tonight personally?
Personally, it's a great win. I mean, it proves how far we've come this year. I mean, we worked hard every day, and this is our reward.
The Huskies were now 1 win away from advancing to the NIT Final Four at Madison Square Garden. The opponent between them and Manhattan was Virginia Commonwealth. Finding a location to play the game proved to be a challenge.
They're coming. They're coming to your town. Wait till you tell the kids. The all-new Muppet Babies Live with special guest stars Miss Piggy and Kermit.
Hello, everybody. Hi there.
The Muppet Babies live on stage. Wait till you tell the kids.
The Muppet Babies were booked at the Civic Center, and the New Haven Coliseum, Springfield Civic Center, and Worcester Centrum were also unavailable. VCU's home court, the Richmond Coliseum, was booked by George Thorogood and the Destroyers. The solution? The 4,500-seat field house on campus at Storrs, where UConn had won 21 straight games. The UConn athletic department would add as many seats as possible, but many fans would surely be left on the outside looking in. One person who was not happy with the location of the game was VCU head coach Mike Polio. When asked his thoughts on the field house after seeing it in person, his response was, quote, "That's like asking, does Hitler like Russian winters? It's just a shame that a quarterfinal game of the NIT has to be in a facility like that." End quote. Calhoun compared VCU's style to Seton Hall. The Rams came into the game 5th in the nation in rebounding and averaged 10 more points per game than the Huskies. In front of a fieldhouse record crowd of 4,801, the Huskies advanced to the NIT Final Four with a 72-61 victory. It was a back-and-forth battle for most of the game, with UConn trailing at the half 32-29. With a score tied at 51, the Huskies closed the game with a 21-10 run to earn the trip to MSG. UConn's former longtime Senior Associate Director of Athletics Communication, Mike Enright, talks about the electricity in the fieldhouse that night.
People remember there were 2 big kind of air tubes on top of the fieldhouse for the heating and ventilation system, and they probably hadn't been dusted since the building opened. And the building just rocked so much that night that the dust of 30 years, was falling down. And there's great pictures of looking like a foggy night in London of that night. And it was, the place was packed, and it was students and slowly but surely the students were coming back to the basketball games. I think that that Virginia Commonwealth game was slowly but surely when the students started coming back, and you could not fit one more person in the field house that night. We sure the fire inspector looked at it a million times, but there wasn't room for one more person. There were folding chairs set up between the court and the first row of bleachers. It was just loud, and it was innocent in a way. It was, here we are. Here's UConn going to the tournament. Most schools now don't want to play in, but we were going. We won, and we were going to the Final Four in New York City, and we were darn proud of it.
Jeff King was the hero for the Huskies, coming off the bench to score 14 points. The other 2 standouts were the 2 players who a year ago weren't even sure they'd still be part of the program. Phil Gamble scored 18 points and Cliff Robinson 17, and both were thrilled to be on the magical ride. UConn's opponent in the semifinals at MSG was a familiar one, the Boston College Eagles. The two teams split their two matchups during the regular season, with the home team holding serve in each game. The key to beating the Eagles was containing their star guard, Dana Barros. In BC's win, he scored 21 points. In the UConn win, the Huskies held them to 14. Barros was averaging 22 points in BC's 3 NIT wins. In the first half, Barros was seemingly unstoppable.
20 seconds to go. Here's Barros. 15 seconds to go.
Getting organized, usually do a bump for Barros.
Steve Benton.
There it is.
There's Barros for 3. And that will do it for the first half as Barros hits nothing but net in a remarkable first half performance. 22 for Dana Barros.
In that first half, Barros hit 5 of 7 three-pointers, including the one you just heard at the end of the half, to give him 22 points and BC a 41-33 halftime lead. Here's UConn's Willie McLeod on the halftime adjustments.
Oh, well, I remember, like I said, playing against Dana Barros, playing against Boston College, and this was probably, I want to say, our third time playing them that season. We may have split during the regular season, I believe. This particular time, Dana Barros, like I said, 5'7" and could score. And I think this was the game because I think Spider, Robert Urseries, may have started off guarding him. And I think Dana Barros hit a shot from almost half court, it seemed like. And Spider kind of sort of looked over at Coach, looked at the bench there, and Coach like, guard him. But I remember Dana, he was hot. He was hot. He was on fire. And if memory serves me correctly, he may have had either 22 or 23 points at the half. Coach came in and he said that the main people that was going to guard him in the second half was Lyman DePriest and myself. I believe Dana Barros finished. I think he only scored 4 points in the second half, and I think 2 of them may have been off of free throws, and another was another regular basket, another basket. But it was one of the things that Coach had told us was that everything we taught you about man-to-man defense, that goes out the window. You're going to face guard him. You're going to have your back to everybody else. If he goes to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom with him. Okay. And even though like myself and Lyman and I think Spider still guarded him some more in the second half also, we may have been the main defenders on him, but it was just a team. It was a team effort, the encouragement from that, everybody on the team when you come out the game, because it would be like maybe you play about maybe 3 minutes and you're gassed because they set so many screens for him. We're fighting through, trying to get through, make sure we got hands up. But like I say, it was a team effort to shut him down in the second half, and we did that.
Lyman DePriest had an advantage of 6 inches and 25 pounds over Barros, and he made it his mission to stop him. UConn switched to a box-and-1 defense, keying on Barros. Barros only attempted 2 shots in the second half, scoring just 2 points. Shutting Barros down in the second half has rightly earned legendary status among UConn fans over the years. Barros' only 2 points in the second half gave Boston College their last lead of the game at 49-48. UConn then went on a 24-8 run in the second half and defeated Boston College 73-67. Cliff Robinson led the Huskies with 29 points, and Phil Gamble added 15 as UConn advanced to the NIT championship game to face the Ohio State Buckeyes.
The final score, University of Connecticut 73, Boston College 67. Cliff Robinson, the scoring star with 29, Phil Gamble with 15, Tate George with 12, but what about Lyman DePriest, who did the defensive job on Dana Barros? In the second half, Barros had only 2 points and finished the game with 24. So an unbelievable finish by the Huskies, who in the second half came out of the gate, trailed by 8 at halftime, went on a 33-12 tear, and hung on gamely.
Well, we got some UConn fans. You made an interesting point. The defense, DePriest, but the box-and-1, Jimmy Calhoun starting the half with it and just really decimating the BC attack, taking Barros totally out of it.
Dana Barros with 22. He lit up UConn in the first half, but in the second half, only the 1 bucket. And UConn, up by 3, had to hold on when BC made a very valiant run.
BC, of course, didn't pack the tack, went right back at them, but a stronger UConn club.
Let's go to Dwayne Dow.
There's their winning coach. Hey, Jim Calhoun, you look a little drained.
Well, Dana Barrow's can do that to you. And,
we just blanketed him in the second half.
We made a couple adjustments at halftime, obviously, and we just come out and played 20 minutes of awfully good basketball.
What a tremendous comeback. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Wayne.
Ohio State was considered the first team out of making the NCAA tournament, and they certainly played like it in the NIT. They were led by guard Jay Burson, along with freshman forward and former top recruiting target for UConn, Perry Carter. As with all of UConn's games during the NIT, this was another close game throughout. This time, Cliff Robinson was not much of a factor. He picked up his fourth foul early in the second half, sitting for nearly 12 minutes before fouling out with just under 3 minutes left and scoring only 5 points. After only leading 27-25 at halftime, the Huskies put together an 8-0 run to give them a 59-48 lead with 4:55 to play. The Buckeyes would never get closer than 4 points as the Huskies earned their first ever national championship, winning 72-67. Phil Gamble scored 25 points and was named tournament MVP. Jim Calhoun was moved to near tears after the game. Said Calhoun, quote, "I've never been as proud of a group of kids in 22 years of coaching as I am of this team. I told them before the game that I would be proud of them no matter what they did. I just really feel good for Gamble. It's not a basketball thing. It's a personal thing. I told him after everything he's gone through, it felt like he was my own son. He really deserved it. I'm just proud as heck of the whole team." End quote. Willie McLeod still has fond memories of the NIT run to this day.
It's funny, you look back at it and you hear the people nowadays, you do it for the fans. We did it for the fans. You know what? It was that. I mean, yes, we did it for us as the UConn Huskies, as the school, as our family. But the fans, I mean, you all were unbelievable. The fans were just so appreciative of it. It was something that UConn hadn't had, like that type of championship to celebrate, men's basketball wise. Okay. And it was just something that, that we just, would never forget. I remember, my mom was at the game. I had family and friends at the game. And, I remember seeing Phil Gamble and Jeff King up on the backboard. And that, that's one of the pictures that will go down forever. But it was just an unbelievable feeling. I don't think that no one slept on the bus because I believe we drove back to stores that night. The people that were still there waiting for us. Then you heard stories about the bonfires in the jungle there. I was like, man, oh man. And Coach Calhoun, he instilled that in all of us. We all believe, and it showed through the whole season. Through winning the NIT championship. And one thing that Coach said, he said there's going to be two champions, an NCAA champion and an NIT champion. So we are champions. So and believe it or not, to this day, I still wear my ring proud.
Here's WFSB's Bill Patrick with a segment that aired the following day. You'll hear from Patrick, Cliff Robinson, Murray Williams, Athletic Director Todd Turner, and Jim Calhoun.
Coach Jim Calhoun and his guys have been saying all along that they are better than their record shows, and we should have listened. They were absolutely right. They may not care about this in other parts of the country, but around here, it's never been any bigger or any better than this. And a lot of people are convinced this is just the beginning for UConn.
I feel wonderful right now, It does signify how far our program has come in just this short little time.
There's only two champions in the world, and we're the first champions. And now Monday night there'll be another champion.
I can just hear the cynics now, can't you, saying, well, that's fine and dandy, but it was only the NIT, not the NCAAs. Well, you can take that notion and drop it right in the circular file, folks, because the Huskies finally have something they can really be proud of. Now, last night was easily the most exciting moment in UConn basketball history. But what they should really be excited about is the future, because the Huskies finally have one.
Well, in general, the NIT doesn't have the prestige of the NCAA, but for our program right now, it's a very, very important step. It's a step forward, a step into the so-called national spotlight. We badly need that, and so I think it's very significant for us.
Until now, Coach Calhoun and his staff had some pretty decent recruiting enticements. They could talk about the Big East, the media exposure, or the brand new sports complex that's about to be completed. But I'll tell you, what happened last night at Madison Square Garden, That is a coach's dream come true.
A lot of times you talk to different recruits and you say, hey, it's going to happen up there. It's going to happen up there. Well, some of it happened already. So now you can tangibly say, hey, we played this stage, and if you come here, maybe we get to another stage.
Here's assistant coach Dave Lato on the importance of winning the NIT.
For the fan base and for the program, monumental. At the time, the NCAA was huge, quite obviously, but so was the NIT. Today, it's a little different. Coaches seem to get fired sometimes after winning NIT championships. But for anybody starving for wins, as the UConn base was, I remember being in the field house and playing VCU and winning, and there was such a euphoria and noise that the dust was coming off the beams up above. Probably fit more people that night than had ever been in the field house. Going to New York, playing Ohio State, but Boston College before that, which was a Big East foe. And I remember playing against Dana Barrows, and in some of he had, I don't know what it was, 24, 26 point, whatever it was at halftime. And Lyman, in the halftime speech saying, I'll guard him. And then he had 2 points after that. And then winning, and just the fans rushing the court, traveling to New York from Connecticut, that started the wave of Big East participation. It was our national championship, the same way anybody would celebrate an NCAA championship. And that's how our fans and everybody surrounding the program felt about it.
Former Norwich Bulletin UConn beat reporter Pete Abraham, who now covers the Boston Red Sox for the Boston Globe, reflects on the NIT championship.
Well, the NIT at the time was a big deal. And, not like it is now. And going to New York to play was a really big deal. Go to Madison Square Garden. At the time, UConn wasn't good enough to play St. John's in Madison Square Garden. The only time they played in Madison Square Garden was in the 8-9 game of the Big East tournament, and they would usually get beat, and that was the end of that. So for them to go back to MSG and win the NIT, and Ohio State was a very legitimate team, and they had Jay Burson there. They were a good team, and that was like UConn accomplished something, which they hadn't accomplished anything in the longest time. And I remember there were so many UConn fans who came down on the train, and the place was really, it wasn't remotely full. I bet you there were 8,000 or 9,000 people there, but they were all UConn fans. They weren't Ohio State fans. And Jim is an East Coast guy, and the NIT meant something to him. And that was sort of like, well, if they can do this, maybe they can do something else. Maybe they can win 8 games in the Big East, or maybe they can get some better players. And the other part about it was that it really engaged the fans too. That was, I think, the moment that the fans started thinking this fast talking nutty guy from Massachusetts, he might be onto something. So maybe we should start showing up and paying attention.
And finally, here's UConn's longtime director of athletic communications, Tim Tolikin, on how the NIT was a major building block for the future.
The NIT truly sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. I know when you talk to Jim, he will mention the NIT as a lot bigger than people now historically, because its luster even then wasn't what it was back in the 50s, 60s, when it was bigger than the NCAA tournament. But 1988 gave us for the first time, and gave our fans for the first time, it was a championship, and it was a terminal tournament that we had to win 5 games to win. And in doing so, they talk about Tate shot in 90. Jim talks about Tate shot beating West Virginia at West Virginia, the first game of the 5. And I think we shot 43% as a team, one of the worst field goal percentages Jim's ever had during the regular season. And for 5 games in 1988 March, we shot over 54% as a team in those 5 games. There's no explaining it. It just happened. And the NIT was very important. I remember being down in the bowels of Madison Square Garden, leaning against an old piano with D. Rowe. And D and I would stand there, and he would look at me. Jim just beat Ohio State with D's guys. And he wasn't knocking Spider Ursery and Jeff King and Phil and Cliff and Peichel and Tate. What he was saying is, to D, Ohio State was still among the premier teams. They had won national championships when D. Rowe would go to Final Fours in the 60s and stuff. And we beat Ohio State in Madison Square Garden with these guys. And it was a compliment to Jim, and it was a compliment to his coaching and to the players to find a way. Even when Cliff in the championship game was in foul trouble, other guys stepped up and we won a championship. And it was a beautiful thing. And, Howie and Jim talk about driving home on the bus and guys at the toll booth stopping them and cheering and stuff. And it's pretty neat to go back before the dream season and say that was a building block, but it was a pretty good building block.
April 26, 1988 was declared UConn Basketball Team Day in Connecticut by Governor William O'Neill. That afternoon, the entire team and staff spent the day at the state capitol and were introduced to both the House and the Senate, receiving standing ovations from both groups. After winning the NIT in only Calhoun's second year, which followed a 9-19 record in his first season, expectations had been raised, seemingly overnight. The 1988-89 team would return every starter from the NIT title game, along with some significant recruits. Cliff Robinson talked about the team's expectations heading into the next season. Quote, "We came so far this year, I would expect us to go to the NCAAs. If we don't, I'd be upset." End quote. Coming up on the next episode of the Dream Season podcast, setting the table for the dream season. Before I wrap up this episode, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the untimely passing of 3 members of that NIT championship team. Jeff King passed away in 1997 at just 31 years old, a victim of Marfan syndrome, a genetic condition that affects the heart. Jeff was an art major at UConn who continued his basketball career in the CBA and in Europe. Robert Spider Ursery battled Hodgkin's disease for 6 years before finally succumbing in 2008 at the age of 44. Spider was a probation officer in Hartford for more than 15 years and always found time to attend UConn games. Cliff Robinson died after a year-long fight with lymphoma in 2020. He was just 53 years old. Cliff had an incredible 18-year career in the NBA, averaging 14.2 points for his career, winning the NBA Sixth Man of the Year award in 1992-93, and was an All-Star in 1994. I mentioned the passing of those 3 teammates, not to end this episode on a down note, but to shed light on another member of that team who is currently dealing with some health issues. Willie McLeod has been battling prostate cancer for the past 2 years. He's had successful surgery and is currently doing well, but is not out of the woods just yet. Here's Willie.
I had the surgery, had prostate removed. It was okay for a while, and then the levels went back up again. And so what it was, and I went to the one place here in Florida, the Moffitt Cancer Center, and everyone, it's like they're probably the best place to have surgery done. And what it was, they just said it just could have been somewhere that they may have touched someplace on the sides or whatever when they were removing it. And so that's why it came back. Then I went through radiation, did 9 weeks of radiation, 5 days a week. And so then everything was fine. And so then recently, a month or so ago, my levels increased a little bit. So my doctors, they just want to be sure again. So just starting doing, more and more testing. Later on this month, I'll go back to the Moffitt Cancer Center to do, more blood work, and we'll hopefully, the numbers, it's still going to be low and everything. The crazy thing about it though, I feel fine. I really do. I feel fine. But one thing that's never going to happen, my spirit is great. My spirit is good. I have a good supporting family and friends, who reach out. And I tell everyone, if you just want to just text me, say hello. I think I even on the GoFundMe on Facebook. And Shelly, she did an amazing thing with that. So totally surprised me. So I say, if somebody just want to send a card, hey, we're praying for you, we're thinking about you. I welcome it all.
I'll have a link to the GoFundMe page in the show notes, where you can find information on how to donate to help offset the costs of Willie's treatment and how to send him a note of encouragement. Thank you. The Dream Season podcast is researched, written, and produced by me, Matt Edwards. Written sources for this episode include the Hartford Current Archives, Ken Davis's University of Connecticut Basketball Vault, and Hoop Tales, UConn Huskies Men's Basketball by Robert Porter and the Mayor, Wayne Norman. If you have any memories to share about anything I just mentioned, want to correct me on something I screwed up, or just have general feedback to give, send me an email at dreamseasonpod@gmail.com or call and leave me a message at 903-884-8990. If you leave your name and location, you may hear yourself on a future episode. You can also connect with the show via Twitter and Instagram at DreamSeasonPod. Thank you again for all the positive feedback I've received so far. And as always, I really, really appreciate you listening. Thank you.